Tomorrow is the 15th anniversary of the attack on America that claimed nearly 3,000 lives. After al-Qaeda terrorists flew passenger jets into the World Trade Center in New York, the Pentagon outside Washington, and a field in Pennsylvania. After 9/11, terror suspects captured overseas were detained by the Bush administration at a military base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and a new system was developed to handle their cases. While President Obama has favored federal court to prosecute terror suspects, the nation's only pending 9/11 case is unresolved at Guantanamo. In tonight's signature segment, NewsHour Weekend's Phil Hirschkorn reports on the debate over the best venue to bring terrorists to justice.
On September 11, 2001, Jean Nebbia lost her big brother, Stephen Schlag.
Stephen was a character, and if you didn't like him, he would do something to you to make sure you liked him.
A generous soul who loved to ski, a bond trader for Cantor Fitzgerald, Schlag was trapped on the 105th floor of the North Tower, above the first plane hijackers crashed into the World Trade Center. A teacher's assistant from New Jersey, Nebbia volunteers for the 9/11 Tribute Center, giving tours of the memorial site.
I get to let people know everything about him. My thoughts are to celebrate what I had with him.
Nebbia has also stared down her brother's alleged killers in person at legal proceedings called military commissions at the U.S. Naval Base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. These 5 men are the only people in U.S. custody now charged with a direct role in planning 9/11. Long after their capture and detention in secret CIA prisons overseas, they were transferred to Guantanamo 10 years ago. The government says Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, known as KSM, was the architect who brought the plane's plot to al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden. Ramzi bin al-Shibh was allegedly his right-hand man, the liaison with the 19 hijackers who carried out the attacks. Walid bin Attash allegedly helped train the hijackers in camps in Afghanistan. Mustafa al-Hassawi and Ali Abdul Aziz Ali allegedly funneled money to the hijackers.
They've already admitted to it. They'll get convicted, and the death penalty will be justice served.
But that outcome is neither guaranteed nor coming soon. With the military commissions mired in procedural roadblocks and interminable delays, prosecutors and defense attorneys involved believe the case won't be concluded before the year 2020. Former United States Attorney David Kelly was part of a team of federal prosecutors in New York that wrote the book on prosecuting major terrorism cases. The first chapter was the trial for the 1993 World Trade Center truck bombing, which convicted 4 defendants, each sentenced to 240 years in prison.
You know, we were the go-to folks pre-9/11 and the criminal justice system, and then on September 12th, it wasn't so much that way anymore.
Kelly won the jury conviction against the attack's ringleader, Ramzi Youssef, who was sentenced to life in prison.
Cold-blooded indeed, and he could, look at you and smile and rip your heart out at the same time.
In the mid-1990s, Kelly's colleagues in the Southern District of New York also convicted Omar Abdel Rahman, the blind sheikh from Egypt, and 9 other Islamic extremists for a conspiracy to carry out attacks on New York City landmarks like the George Washington Bridge and the United Nations headquarters.
I think the most memorable, historically significant thing about it for me is the degree to which it indicated what was coming.
Michael McCasey was the judge who presided over the trial and used his discretion to sentence Abdel Rahman to life behind bars.
It was not a great ordeal or a tough call.
But McCasey worries the public disclosure of evidence at that trial aided America's enemies.
The government was required to serve a list of unindicted co-conspirators that it knew about, and they did. One name on that list was Osama bin Laden. Very few people had ever heard of him at the time. We later found out that within 10 days or 2 weeks after that letter was served on the defendants, it had found its way to Khartoum, where bin Laden was then living, and so that he was aware not only that the government knew about him, but also who else the government knew about.
After bin Laden soldiers truck bombed U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998, killing more than 200 people, including a dozen Americans, federal prosecutors in New York convicted 4 men for the attack in a jury trial that ended a few weeks before 9/11. All received life sentences. Former federal prosecutor David Kelly believes those early cases proved terrorism trials work.
Not only because it's effective because it gets terrorists off the streets, but because it's done in a way that meets all of our constitutional requirements.
One of those requirements is that any defendant's statements be voluntary, not coerced. Kelly says it's a myth that once terrorism defendants get a lawyer, they automatically stop talking.
The old adage is, bad guys just want to talk, and they typically do. And notwithstanding their opportunity to have a lawyer, they typically will forego that, at least at the outset, and they'll give you a lot of information.
Before the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Northern Virginia, the FBI had tried to get information, unsuccessfully, from al-Qaeda operative Zacarias Moussaoui, who was arrested for a visa overstay 3.5 weeks before 9/11 after arousing suspicion in a Minnesota flight school. Since Moussaoui ended up pleading guilty, his trial in Virginia federal court focused only on his sentence. Instead of the death penalty, the jury opted for life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Moussaoui sits in a cell 23 hours a day, doesn't even have natural light.
Edward McMahon led the defense team. To date, Moussaoui is the only person convicted by the U.S. in any venue for the 9/11 conspiracy.
It was a very dignified proceeding conducted by a federal judge in a federal courtroom under rules of evidence. A jury deliberated and came to its verdict. Was the client, did he act out? Of course, that happens a lot in criminal cases.
Moussaoui's antics and his trying to represent himself caused delays, but so did the government's blocking access to al-Qaeda leaders in military custody like KSM that Moussaoui wanted to testify on his behalf. From arraignment to verdict in May 2006, the case took 4.5 years.
It seems like a blink of time compared to what's happening in Cuba. 10 years later, they don't even have a trial date. If I went in court and told a judge in Alexandria that I needed 10 years to prepare for trial, I'd get 10 weeks.
I believe deeply in both systems.
Charles Cully Stimson helped write the rules for the military commissions as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Bush administration. He's also a former military judge and federal prosecutor. Stimson helped manage that transfer of the 9/11 defendants to Guantanamo in September 2006.
They would be held accountable. They would be brought out of the so-called shadows, and that for those who could be tried, they'd be subjected to military commissions.
The legal procedures for handling Guantanamo detainees have been subjected to 3 Supreme Court decisions requiring changes in the military commissions spelled out in 2 acts of Congress. There have been endless debates about what evidence is admissible, including the mistreatment of defendants in CIA custody. Stimson is as disappointed as anyone that the 9/11 military commissions are taking so long. It could be 20 years after 9/11 before we've had a 9/11 military commission completed.
And that leaves a bad taste in my mouth and everyone watching this show. The measure of justice is not speed, it's fairness. And you know, the military commissions are not speedy, and they're not quick justice.
And it's not a flaw of design.
I think that it's because it's new and because it is being tested aggressively and appropriately by the defense in every which way to Sunday. It's taking time. The best reason that it should stay at Guantanamo is because so much work has been done.
Stimson points out that work includes 20 weeks of pretrial hearings, 50 oral arguments, 217 substantive motions, and 500,000 pieces of evidence turned over to defense teams.
There's a law in place, a federal law in place that said they can't be brought to the United States. So unless and until the Congress changes that law and there's the political will to bring them to the federal district court and hit the restart button, it's not going to happen.
That law passed after the Obama administration announced in late 2009 it intended to transfer the 9/11 defendants from Guantanamo to New York for trial in the federal courthouse less than a mile from Ground Zero. The decision reflected not only a preference of venue by the President and Attorney General Eric Holder, but a track record. Since 9/11, federal prosecutors have won more than 350 terrorism-related convictions in federal court. Besides Moussaoui, the list includes foiled plotters like shoe bomber Richard Reed, underwear bomber Umar Farouk Abdulmuttalib, and would-be subway bomber Najibullah Zazi. By contrast, military proceedings at Guantanamo have yielded only 8 convictions, half later reversed, and generally lighter sentences. For example, former bin Laden driver Salim Hamdan was sent home to Yemen after a conviction and serving 5.5 years at Guantanamo. Before moving any 9/11 detainees, the Obama Justice Department had a test case, Ahmed Gailani, an East Africa embassy bomber captured in Pakistan in 2004 and sent to Guantanamo. He became the first and only Guantanamo detainee ever transferred to U.S. soil and stood trial in Manhattan federal court.
Gailani, you'll recall, almost beat the case. He was acquitted of all the murder counts resulting from the bombing of the embassies. He was convicted only of what? Conspiracy to damage government property.
But that was enough to get him a life sentence.
It was enough to get him a life sentence because of the attendant circumstances, but it was an awfully close matter.
That close verdict, plus fears that defendants would have a platform in open court and concerns about public safety in Lower Manhattan, fueled opposition to moving the 9/11 trial.
Is there a security concern? Yeah, but there's also it's yet another hurdle that can be overcome. I saw greater traffic jams when we came out with Martha Stewart's conviction than when we came out with any of the terrorist convictions.
Still, by 2011, Obama and Holder changed course. The 9/11 defendants remained at Guantanamo.
If when Obama had taken office, if he'd done what he said, and he had moved those 5 gentlemen to New York City, they would have already been tried and convicted, no question in my mind. And I feel sad for the family members, the 9/11 family members who still want justice and who fly down to Cuba and watch these ridiculous proceedings in Cuba.
For 2 years at Guantanamo, Edward McMahon assisted the defense team for 9/11 defendant Walid bin Attash. From what he saw, he believes the military is miscast to handle the 9/11 case.
You wouldn't ask the Justice Department to go take Baghdad, and charge into the palace holding briefcases. Oh, I just think there's a lot of institutional inability to put on a death penalty trial in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. They don't have judges that have ever done it. The prosecutors have never done it.
When Judge McCasey retired from the bench in 2006 and became President George W. Bush's Attorney General the following year, his view of terrorism trials in federal court had dimmed.
We've already got a reputation for having a fair system. We don't need to establish it. The sense that we have to somehow prove something to the world, I think, is ridiculous.
McCasey also sees a benefit in the defendant's ongoing military detention of the 9/11 suspects.
Most valuable feature of any of these defendants is as a source of intelligence. You get some information, you go back, check on it, maybe go back for more. Once he broke, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was providing information for months.
But you would stay the course with them for these 9/11 defendants?
Not sure. I think I would. I think starting again would be a travesty.
But Guantanamo is not a cheap facility to keep running. These days, with the prisoner census below 100, it's estimated it's $3 to $4 million per prisoner per year.
Right. You know what the cure for that is?
No.
Bring more prisoners.
Also willing to wait the outcome at Guantanamo is Jean Nebbia, who lost her brother on 9/11.
We need justice. It's frustrating, but I have no desire to see them on American soil.